Let's just introduce Mariana.
Thank you. And as a result of my dinner with Greg, I've gone back and I'm redoing my entire book, and it's going to be for men and women, not just for women. One of the things that you don't know about the three speakers here tonight that we discovered is that all of us grew up in Saskatchewan. I grew up in a small town called Strasbourg of fewer than 1,000 people. My father owned the hotel. And as a little girl, I loved working behind the desk. I'd see a traveler come in through the front door. I'd grab a form for him to fill out, a pen. I'd mentally run through which room does he like. I'd go and get that key. I knew my father needed the cash box. He'd make change. I'd run and put it back in the safe. And I remember one day one of those travelers saying, "You could put that girl out in the back alley and she could fend for herself. I wish my son had half that gumption." And my father glowed. How do you think I felt? Pretty good. I wanted more of that praise, and I could see that being compared to a boy was really good, and that if I was action-oriented, if I was self-sufficient and independent enough that I could live in an alleyway, I was going to get praised. I cultivated more of that. I didn't call it masculine energy at the time, but that's what I was doing. About 7 years later, I was 12. I stood on a stage in a small town hall. It was the first music festival in our region. And our choir leader was responsible for filling the roster. And she was spending all of her time with the songbirds from our choir, those who had the rich overtones in their voices. She helped them pick a song and made sure they were sounding really good. The rest of us, we were fillers and we knew it. We got to pick our own songs, and I picked A Froggy Who Went A-Courting. It was all nonsense words. Didn't matter to me that I was a filler. I loved that song, and I belted it out with great enthusiasm. I felt empathy for that frog. I felt his emotions. I knew the audience felt his emotions, and we connected. The adjudicator gave me the highest mark in the festival. And I'll never forget his words. He said that those nonsense words were not empty envelopes, but they were filled with raw and rich emotion. At the end of the day, he came up on stage and gave me a great big brass trophy. And I remember distinctly, as I was getting congratulated, that I thought, I do not have the most promising voice in this festival, but clearly it's very valuable to be able to connect with people on an emotional level. I didn't call that feminine energy at the time, but that's clearly what I was using. I also, growing up in Strasbourg, loved to have circuses in the backyard of the hotel. We had a lot of activity in that backyard. And I was, being masculine energy, the boss of everything. And I remember one day that dressing my brother and his friends up to have a fashion show in my clothes. And they were ridiculed and teased for wearing girls' clothes. One of their friends was actually even punished by his father. And I thought, I can be a tomboy, and I can be not only accepted as a tomboy, but actually appreciated. And these poor guys, they're not allowed to enter into my area at all. And that's really limiting them. And I watched my brother and his friends take their emotions and bury them deep. They became the proverbial rock. So it's not surprising that when these boys who were proverbial rocks grew up, they adopted a masculine, tough guy leadership style. And I saw so much of that at Potash. There we were, the world's largest fertilizer company, a major miner. I was the only woman in senior management for many years. I had a chance to watch this tough guy leadership style firsthand. But it was a defining moment for me when we one day had a man come into our company and he completely bucked this system. Now, we were a commodity company. We had too much production, not enough demand. When that happens, prices fall, companies lose money, heads roll. Our board got rid of our CEO. They brought in a new guy. He was from not only outside the company, he was from outside the country. He came from southern United States, and he talked funny. Now, he came into our company. He was a US military man. He walked very erectly. I called him a walking, talking Viagra tablet. That's how much masculine energy this guy had. He looked at the numbers and he said, "We've got too much production. We have to close down a plant." People in Saskatchewan were up in arms. How dare an outsider come in and shut down one of our plants? These are our resources. Somebody wrote a letter to the editor and they said, "This guy cannot manage his way out of a pay toilet." He was livid. I was a newly appointed vice president. I was charged with getting to the bottom of who wrote this letter. The address was correct. The phone number was correct. The name was fictitious. The address and the phone number belonged to one of our hourly paid workers. He didn't write the letter. Who do you think wrote the letter? His wife. Now, this masculine energy new CEO, he could have stayed in his masculine energy. He could have dialed it up to the extreme. He could have fired that hourly paid worker. He could have publicly humiliated the wife. Instead of that, he switched right to his previously unseen feminine energy. He phoned her up and in the nicest possible way invited her for coffee on neutral ground. They met at the Sheraton. And when she arrived, he stayed in his feminine energy. He didn't use his masculine and start telling her all the reasons that he needed to close that plant. Instead of that, he listened. He listened to her tell about her friends that were going to have to move because they were out of work. And then he stayed in his feminine energy and he empathized. And then he showed his vulnerability and shared his story. And he told her how he was the son of an hourly paid worker. And they had had to move a lot when he was a little boy. And he remembers when he was 5 years old, leaving behind his best friend Billy. And he never saw Billy again. He shared her pain. After that meeting was over, she was his new best friend. She put him on her Christmas card list. She went and told all the other hourly paid workers and their wives that he was doing the very best that he could do for this company. He turned an adversary into an advocate by using his feminine energy, and it had lasting effects on me and became the basis of my gender physics theory. Each and every one of us have both energies in us, and we can use them. And we can choose which energy is the right energy for every situation, for every audience, and for every venue. It's just like water coming out of a tap. If you want to have a cold drink, you turn on that water to quench your thirst, that cold tap. But if you want to have a hot bath to relax, you turn on that water. But you don't want that water to be too hot so you'll get burned, so you put your hand under the faucet, you adjust a little cold, a little hot, a little cold, a little hot, until you find exactly the right temperature for your needs. You can use your masculine and your feminine exactly the same way. You just have to be open to it. The problem is that we are born and we are labeled pink or blue. And then all these expectations are piled upon us. And these expectations are very limiting. I worked with a CFO, and his undergraduate degree was biology. And one day he said to me, you know, Betty Ann, how women have the XX chromosome and men have the XY? Well, the bottom half of your last X has fallen off. It's looking an awful lot like a Y. What he was really saying is there's a lot of man in your woman. There probably is innately. It was encouraged behind that hotel desk when I was a young girl. And then I worked with all these men for so many years. It was quite natural that I adopted that culture. These expectations that we have limit us. It prevents many women from putting up their hand, volunteering for a stretch assignment, and being perceived as a leader. And it also discourages many men from feeling their feelings, which prevents them from being able to feel another's feelings and create that bond that makes for a meaningful relationship. So we both lose. All of us that are only using one energy are like a bird flying on one wing. We could be flying higher and further and faster if we were using both. And there's no physiological reason, exactly as Delise said, for us to only use one. It's all socialization. We used to believe there's a difference between male brains and female brains, and that's why we act differently. In December of 2014, the University of Tel Aviv released results that show that there is no difference between a male and a female brain. They took 1,400 brains and they did MRIs on them, and what they found is that there's no difference in gray matter, white matter, or connections for men and women. There's lots of different brains. They're all made up of a myriad of factors, but it has nothing to do with our gender. Those brains that would be considered a male brain or a female brain are fewer than 1% of the total. So both these energies are there to be had for each and every one of us. Gender physics means let's take down the fences, let's use them both. When I was working at Potash, we used to survey our stakeholders, our customers, our employees, our suppliers, our communities. We were going out and we were interested in the other so that we could respond to their needs. What energy were we using? Feminine, thank you. And we had all these different plants. And our mine managers, they were really competitive with each other, trying to have the lowest costs. And that was great for me. I was going out talking to the investment community, and I could say, look how low our costs are. And when they were being so competitive, what energy were they using? Masculine, exactly. And when we would have a crisis at a plant, God forbid, but it happened from time to time, I was always really happy when there was someone at that plant that would step forward, activate their masculine energy, set up a hierarchy, delegate the responsibilities, and get that crisis under control as quickly as possible. There's important times to use feminine energy as well. If you're setting up a corporate value, establishing your company values or its mission statement, you want people to have good discussion, to take time, to collaborate, to build on one another's ideas, to find synergies, to reach a consensus so that everybody leaves that room following the higher meaning. Each and every one of us have this ability. The problem is that we have been programmed to believe that the masculine characteristics are interchangeable with leadership. And the world is changing, as Delee described. A lot of the attributes of the feminine are becoming more important. In fact, there was an article in Atlantic magazine last year, and they talked about how important the characteristics of the feminine are becoming. And a professor from the Columbia Business School said, we're teaching our students how to read, how to be more sensitive to employees' emotions, how to read facial expressions, interpret body language. We're not telling them that we're teaching them the attributes of the feminine, but that's exactly what we're doing. Now, I'd like to tell you that I have all this mastered, but that's not the case. I've revealed to you that I'm a masculine energy woman. And that means that I can disassociate from my emotions with the best of them. My resiliency, which is something that I was praised for when I worked at Potash, we had a setback, I could put it behind me, and I could move forward with great focus. But that can be to my detriment, because I put those feelings behind me, I didn't feel them. And until you feel them, when you want to relate to someone else in a meaningful relationship, and they're going through something difficult, you want to be able to feel what they're feeling so that you can empathize and you can make a connection. And I've really had to work at doing that. And I don't think I'm there yet. But some of the things that I am doing that I would invite you to try would be, first of all, to actually feel a feeling, rather than, as Greg was describing earlier, making yourself so busy that you don't take time to feel it. And actually, when a feeling comes to you, think, I can feel that in tingling in the top of my head, or is it something that's making me feel, kind of making my heart race, or does it make my arms feel really heavy? Because until you stop and get out of your head and actually feel it in your body, you're not sure that it's actually even a feeling yet. But then when someone's going through something, someone who is important to you, you can feel how they're feeling and you can empathize. And that means listening more, because there's no better way to show empathy than by listening. And finally, get comfortable with tears. Because tears are really a way that we can cleanse those emotions that we've just felt. And we need to be comfortable with our tears and with others, because tears can really bring clarity to a situation. And no one has ever died from crying. So I invite each and every one of you to join me in developing your feminine energy. Because not only will you use your masculine to put up your hand and volunteer for a stretch assignment and help find a seat at the table, that professional achievement only feels really valuable if you can have personal satisfaction that comes from meaningful relationships, and that comes from using your feminine energy. Thank you.